Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. This week I've come to Buckinghamshire, a slither of a county that stretches all the way from the west of London and the M25 to Buckingham and half of Silverstone. It's mainly a services and farming county, meaning it's unlikely that we're going to find any massive quarries or heavy industry, but instead some lovely countryside like the Chiltern Hills, an area of outstanding natural beauty. And then there's places like Aylesbury, an area. Our journey this week sees us travelling from Buckingham to Wendover, and as always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and along the way we'll be stopping to look at the most random collection of things I can come up with. We start then in Buckingham, which, given the name, you'd think was the capital city of Buckinghamshire, but no, it used to be, but for some reason in the 18th century it was changed and Aylesbury became the capital of Buckinghamshire, a decision that has surely been regretted ever since. The change may have been made because Buckingham has never really been that large a town. In the days of my guidebook, there were only around 3,500 people living here. Today, that's risen to just over 12,000, but it's still far from being a large town. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Buckingham's Old Gow. You won't miss this impressive structure that stands right in the middle of Buckingham's High Street, which started out as a prison in 1748. Over the years, it's seen many uses, but in the days of my guidebook, it would have been a fire station with a separate section rented out by the military to be used as an armoury. With that in mind, I'm not really sure why the guidebook recommends we visit. Maybe it's to appreciate the structure itself, which, other than a rounded frontage added in 1839, mostly remains unchanged since its construction. Today, it's open as a volunteer-run museum that looks at local history. Something else that remains mostly unchanged is the A413, which we'll be using to head out of Buckingham and on to our next destination. But before we get there, I thought we'd take a detour to look at a large infrastructure project that, from what I can tell, hasn't been cancelled. Not yet, anyway. I've come to Verney Junction, which is two things: a small hamlet in Buckinghamshire and at one point also a four-way railway junction with lines running from Aylesbury to Buckingham and Bicester to Milton Keynes. These railways would close in the 1960s, leaving Verney Junction as nothing more than a very quiet rural hamlet. Until that is, the East-West Rail project came along in 2020 with the plan to construct a new railway connecting Bicester to Milton Keynes, just like the old days. It's part of a massive railway project that, if completed, will see a railway connection created between Oxford and Cambridge, with stops on the way via Bedford and Milton Keynes. And it's funny because we used to have a railway doing exactly that, but it was closed in the 1960s. Here at Verney Junction, and the real reason for my visit, they built a new bridge which was completed in 2021. It's one of 16 bridges that were built on this section of the project, and the reason it was built is because the previous method of crossing over the railway was deemed inappropriate by modern standards. To be fair, with the original railway being removed in the 1960s, there wasn't a lot to work with either way, and whilst they could have built a simple crossing, in the 2020s, Network Rail's preference is to build bridges rather than level crossings because they're the safer option. They cost more, a lot more, but can you put a price on your safety? Here's a funny thing. These rubber ducks in the middle of Verney Junction have been put here by the local residents. Apparently the East-West Rail installation has completely buggered up the drainage in the area, so it now floods where it didn't before. So these rubber ducks, when the area floods, float up on top of the water. Hilarious. A short distance from Verney Junction is our next destination, the town of Winslow. In the days of my guidebook, a small village really, with a population of around 1,700. Today, it's not that much larger, with around 4,500 people living here. That said, Winslow is sat right on the East-West Rail project and is having its own railway station built, so who knows, in the future Winslow may expand and become far larger. My guidebook recommends a visit to the Bell Inn, which is a pub, and I have no objections to this. This independent alehouse has been part of Winslow High Street since the mid-1600s. In 1812, the Neal family would take ownership, who would brew their own beer on the site between 1853 and 1916, and the inn would remain in the Neal family's ownership up until 1975. Interestingly, in 1885, a member of the Neal family known as Joseph would leave the UK for Sydney, where he and his brother would set up a department store chain known as Grace Brothers. What started with the acquisition of a few small retail units expanded into a massive organisation with 25 large department stores and a company that would continue trading up until 2004. Not bad for a couple of blokes from Winslow, Buckinghamshire. Moving on, and ordinarily we'd use the A413 to continue our journey. However, there's something in the village of North Marston that I want to take a look at, and to get there it's easier to use the back road, so we'll head that way and pick up the A413 a bit later. The something I wanted to look at is this, the St John Scorns Holy Well. John Scorn was a rector of North Marston who had discovered the water source here in the 12th century, and would you believe it, of all of the sources and wells to discover, this had special water in it with magical healing properties. Magical healing properties, unsuitable for drinking. After a few people fell into the well and died, sadly not saved by the healing water, the well was covered over and it would remain that way until 2005, at which point the well was restored and turned into the structure that we see today. For some reason, Scorn was often pictured with a devil rising out of a boot. It was a sign of his holiness, apparently, but this has led to an interesting feature that you'll find at the well. If you pump enough water into it, a devil will rise out of the boot that sits on the edge. I don't know why, but it's something interesting, isn't it? A short distance from North Marston is the village of Quainton, which isn't very interesting, but what is interesting is the Buckinghamshire railway centre situated nearby. Remember earlier we looked at a four-way railway junction? One of those railways ran from Aylesbury to Buckingham, and on that railway line we'd have once found Quainton Road railway station. It closed in the 1960s, but a preservation society was set up and the station turned into a museum, which was then later restored to retain its 1900s built appearance. The station museum would then evolve to become the Buckinghamshire Railway Centre, and today there are over 170 items on display, from locomotives to rolling stock, across a 25-acre site, and it's well worth the trip, unless you don't like trains. Right, we need to get back on track. And at this point, it's easier to join the A41, so we will, and it will take us to our next destination, the capital city, if you will, of Buckinghamshire. And I don't know why. Welcome to Aylesbury. Look at the state of this building. This is Buckinghamshire County Council's headquarters. It has a 1.9-star review rating on Google. It's shit. Unsurprisingly, this building was constructed in the 1960s, featuring concrete. Lots of concrete. It's about 200 feet high, and it was built because Buckinghamshire County Council decided that the lovely 1920s built office building and separate county hall were no longer adequate for their needs. Although I have to ask, what needs do you have as a council that necessitates the construction of this monstrosity? Although I suppose you can, at least from the top floor, look down on all the peasants. Anyway, in the days of my guidebook, Aylesbury was probably a nice place, yet it was still a busy town with over 12,000 residents. A lot of them would have worked within the automotive industry, which I'll represent today with this abandoned car dealership found on Buckingham Road. Between 1919 and 1925, Cubit Engineering Works manufactured over 3,000 vehicles in Aylesbury. Sadly, they were a bit crap. The factory closed and it's now a housing estate. In later years, US company TRW would set up a factory in Aylesbury. They manufactured automotive parts for pretty much every car that you can think of. Sadly, the automotive industry was a bit crap in 2005. The factory closed and it's now a housing estate. Let's get out of Aylesbury whilst we still can and head to our next destination, which is found near Wendover. We'll pick up the A413 from Aylesbury, which is the only road we need to get there. Nice and easy. Our final destination for today is the pretentious village of Wendover, where a loaf of bread can set you back £4.75, and if it wasn't for the residents of Wendover, HS2 would very likely have cost half as much as it did. I'm just outside of Wendover at Wendover Dean, and I've come to look at the Wendover Dean Viaduct, which is being constructed as part of the HS2 project. Yes, this bit actually is being built. It's one of 50 major viaducts being constructed for HS2, and when completed, it'll be around 450 metres long, and it's the first bridge in the UK to be built using a double composite structure. Okay. These are similar to, if not the same as, the sort of structures you'd find on the French TGV high-speed rail lines, and this construction method means you use far less material, in this case 7,500 tonnes less, which is good for the environment. Unfortunately, despite the cost and expense, it looks to me like they've made the mistake of using Corten steel during its construction, all 1,400 tonnes of it. This is a material that looks rusty, because it is, and it's shite. And there we are then, guys. That's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that. And if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That'll be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.